All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Technorama Tuesdays Webinar Series supported by the CMTO, the Community Media Training Organisation. My name is Hannah Murray. I am the Student Services and Compliance Officer at the Community Media Training Organisation, but I'm also a board member on Technorama. And tonight we have a really interesting webinar in store. We are talking about remote access to your station. So everyone remote, technical distancing. And tonight we have the wonderful Tim Borgas from SACBA, and we also have Josh Pearson from CrocMedia. Also, you can see the handsome man in the corner. That is John Maisels. He's the president of Technorama. Also, Josh is our vice president of Technorama. And I think Tim was also on the board of Technorama at one point.
Tim was.
That's there correct. You go. Yep. So we're all Technoramians here. Before we get properly started, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge our elders past, present and emerging. We are recording this webinar on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. So I'd like to pay my respects. Over to you now about our wonderful topic for this evening.
Shall I kick off?
Yes, please.
Guys?
Well, let me just kick off first with the welcome from Technorama, and we'll come back and do a bit of wrap up at the end, because I'm expecting lots and lots of questions, and you can all hang around for almost as long as you like. We might leave you asking questions of each other if we get bored, but basically just keep the questions coming. I thought I'd just kick off very quickly and answer that question about what's happening with Technorama. So we were all set to run TR20 in Toowoomba. We're going truly regional. We had everything lined up and a fabulous brand new conference facility that will come online in 2 weeks. And guess what happened? So we did put the poll out to say, what does everybody think? And in fact, overwhelmingly, people were saying, yeah, you know, keep going, but events have overtaken us. I mean, there's no way we can run a physical event. So 2 things. One, there will be a TR20 and it will be sometime later in the year or as soon as we are able to get some sense about, you know, how to run it. We can't run a regional conference if there are no planes, no transport, and you're not allowed to cross the border. It's just implausible. But what we can do is run a virtualized conference. And interestingly, I'm in the middle of gearing up for a conference that we've just made the decision last Wednesday to virtualize. That is going to be somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 people with 20 strands of simultaneous programming. We're going to prove that it can be done. And I'm expecting that technology might be brought to bear to support Technorama. Probably running a virtualized event, maybe you know, 1-day event in the June timeframe, and we'll come back to you and see what the appetite is for doing that. But I suspect by then people will be over discussing pop shields and remote control of studios, and we'll be looking forward to discussing some more meaty stuff. I will just also point you to the Technorama website, which has been updated with a number of COVID-19 but technical related things, but also some stuff about viruses. Discovering how viruses work was actually a fascinating technical exercise. There's some very good material there, including a wonderful simulator where if you really want to know how this works, and people say to you, oh, you know, why can't we all go back to the station? Run the simulator and play with what happens when you turn the knobs and you do the distancing thing and not the distancing thing, and people close together and people not close together, and just see how quickly you can get a virus to live or die. Fascinating. And that's all available from the homepage on technorama.org.au. And that's all for me for the moment. I'm going to go now, and I'll hand over to Tim Borgas.
Thanks, John. And yeah, look, I should add, things have changed so much. 6 weeks ago, I was sitting here in Peterborough, which is about 150 kilometres from any community radio station, quietly enjoying my retirement. And Radio Adelaide fell into some deep financial problems, and I've actually joined their board, and we've managed to stave off disaster for the moment, which is good. And then a virus hits and everything changes, because just as we are trying to recover from, you know, a pretty parlous financial situation, I reckon John's eating carrot in the background. Is that you, John?
Sorry.
Mute that microphone.
Yeah.
So it's like we need to run a major metropolitan station that is, it's not just put the needle on the record, it's get good educational content out, get current affairs out. We've got the wire to produce. We need to do so many things. How the hell do we do it? And I will just share this screen, and hopefully this will appear on your screens. There it is. And look, I got to tell you, I did electronic engineering at university, and the first thing I realized that everyone wanted me to repair their computers. So about 15 years ago, I started using Macs because I realized that in 4 years' time, I wouldn't know anything about computers. And that's where I'm at now. I know very little about computers, or at least that's what I tell people, so I don't have to fix their computers. And so I looked for the most cost-effective, most reliable, most work anytime, anywhere situation. And this is what we came up with. This is AnyDesk remote desktop software, and it works on anything. As you can see down the bottom, it'll work on Mac, PC, Linux, iOS, even Raspberry Pi, which I was quite chuffed about that it will work on that. And if you go to anydesk.com, you click on the free download, the actual operating system, it'll work out what you want to download for your computer, and you download it. And then it'll say, okay, you want to install it on your computer. Now this is on a Mac, but you know, whatever, it'll look similar. It hasn't installed it on your computer yet, but even now, this insidious program, which is far worse than any virus I've ever known, has actually given your computer a unique ID. And this isn't my computer, so don't try and hack it. But be very careful with those numbers. This is why I'm using PowerPoint and I'm not showing you a live screen, because you shouldn't show people these numbers unless you want them to access your computer. So you can actually run AnyDesk without installing it on your computer, but there are advantages to it. Obviously, if you want to remote control a computer, you need to install it. So you can see that you've got this screen here that you can allow access to it, and you enter, this is on the left here, my mouse is gone. On the left here is your computer's address, but you would type in an alias or an address of a computer that you wanted to access that you could already set AnyDesk up on. And there are various levels of installation you can do with AnyDesk so that you can install it so that it will always be there, so that even if the computer is asleep, it will wake up and it will allow you to log in. And when you go to the first stage of just having the program running almost in your browser or without an unattended access password set, whenever someone tries to log in, you'll get this little pop-up screen saying, do you want to allow access? Now, obviously, when you're testing, you do it this way, but when you actually want to run your systems remotely, you need to install it, you need to configure it so that it can have complete access over your computer. And that is a really dangerous thing to do, but you've got to do it in order to have this sort of access, so that you have AnyDesk set up on all the computers you want to operate, plus the one you're using to access them. And you end up with a system like this, where this is part of Radio Adelaide's with bits blanked out. We've actually got probably 12 or 15 computers with this on here. And Nikki is probably part of the audience. Nikki could actually tell us more about this, but I'm not sure whether she can actually talk because she's not a presenter. But I'll carry on as best I can. And we actually have it so that various, like the breakfast team, we've left a computer on for them so that they can access that at any time from outside the station, and they can look at the remote screen and they can operate it remotely. They can listen to what's playing on it. And we can also access the on-air machines so that we can change the order of the playlist of the player. We can add new stuff in, we can reboot stuff, you can reboot the computers, you can log in as different users. So everyone has, like we've got almost 10 computers or 11 computers on there. So that's sort of what we've done at Radio Adelaide, and it's been seamless. AnyDesk is so good at finding its way out of even the most nasty situations. It'll work over mobile phones, it'll work over 3G, 4G connections. You don't need to touch your router or do anything. That's why we're using it. But just I'm just going to move the video thing out of the way on my screen. The most important thing is to make sure your computer has a strong login and screensaver password. Don't ever use this on a computer that doesn't have really strong passwords, because if you do, someone will eventually hack it, and once they take control of your computer with AnyDesk, you will never know until all your money is gone from your bank account. There was a huge scam in India some time back. If you type AnyDesk India scam, you'll find it. But AnyDesk is very good. Don't download AnyDesk to a computer, to a target computer that doesn't have a login password, and make sure all your computers have up-to-date software and protected against viruses. Because if they're not, you will get hacked, and then you won't know about it. They will just take over your computer, and it will be awful. So yeah, it's extremely good. But what it does, don't put it on an unprotected computer, because you will never know that it's been taken over. And whenever you load AnyDesk on any computer, whether it's the one you're using at home to access the one at the station, your computer appears, as you saw in that list, your computer appears on there with an address. So make sure your computer has a strong password as well. And lastly, remember to log out of the remote computer when you finish, because otherwise the computer at the station that you're using will still be open. And if someone does walk into the station and accesses that computer, they can just walk up to it and it's as if you were there. There are other ways around that, but I won't go into that because it's a bit more detail. And that's sort of my quick wrap up of AnyDesk.
That's a really good place for us to show the poll results. So I'm going to share the results on the screen now for how comfortable people are remotely accessing their stations. And I'm really pleased to see that a lot of people are very comfortable with the concept. And but there are 12 people that do not yet know how to remote into their station. So can we go from like a really basic, like what do people need to know right from the start? Tim or Josh?
Yeah, sorry, hi, I'm just, my little microphone button wasn't allowing me to click it. That was good, Tim. I guess some of the stuff, and Tim touched on it too, about security and things like that, is when you're enabling this kind of software remotely, is you need to have a purpose. Like I've seen some stations, some companies, some clients go and install this on every single computer they've got. And that's not necessary. You don't need to do. I'm going to take them off because they're reflecting and they're annoying. I'll just go blurry for a bit. You know, one of the things that you see a lot of people do, you know, they put it on the reception computer, they put it on 400 computers in the building, and everybody's got full access to everything. And that's not really, I guess, the best practical way to set up remote access. The really good way to make sure that you're setting this up is the stuff you need to. So for community radio stations, I'm going to assume that you probably want to have remote access to your playout system, something that you can go in and click play on, drop in files and all that kind of stuff. But then this should be one dedicated computer that you've set aside that's got, you know, you're making sure you're keeping up to date. You're running the latest, you know, Windows updates if it's a Windows machine, or Mac updates if it's a Mac machine. You're running the latest virus software, or you're keeping it protected, and also having, you know, that password protected. So I'm not really familiar with AnyDesk. We use TeamViewer a lot, but I'm pretty sure you can make sure you've got a really strong password authentication that goes along with that connect button. Tim can probably answer that. You know, making sure that you're password protecting these things. Now, they're really, really easy to install. You know, Hannah actually after this will send out a bit of a grab from the internet, you know, the top 10, it's got AnyDesk on there, it's got 10 other things on there. Different kind of remote access software. But one of the biggest kind of things I see is really having a plan for remote access within your station. You know, is what computers need to be remote accessed, why are you remote accessing it, and then who has those passwords. You're going to give them to panel operators, are you sharing them on your private Facebook group? You know, making sure that only the people who need to have them is one of the biggest things that you can do to help secure your own environment. And also changing them regularly. You know, changing your passwords quite often is a very good thing. I know some people who still have the same password that was probably set for them when their computers were installed 5 or 6 years ago. If these have remote access, you know, or they're easily guessed passwords, you know, password is not a really secure password. You know, you need to make sure that these are protected. I've seen, you know, my time at Joy and everything, we got hacked twice by somebody using a remote desktop. and there was a generic account that was used for reception to log in, and they used that, that same password twice, and that reception account, because the receptionist needed access to everything, had access to everything. There's lots of different ways of doing it in different software. It's really up to each station to really work out which one is their own. But just having some really good rules about who has access to the software and why is it being installed. As I was saying before, in a station, you'd probably have it on your one playout machine, which means that somebody can log in and hit play with the faders up and control content remotely. If you've got a digital console system or a digital mixer, then something that you'll have maybe remote access on a bit of software that can access, remote access on a computer that can access that. So then you can control that and do it. Johan puts in a really good comment down there in the thing. Some of these software, like TeamViewer, has a log of who connects, so you can track that and you can keep a really close eye on who's actually using it. Some of these software have different user accounts, so you can give access to certain people to certain things. Radio Adelaide. At Radio Adelaide, from Nikki, we have set up different program teams to different computers. There is a risk of having multiple people connected at the same time, which can counter productivity, which can be counterproductive. I'm reading this without my glasses, especially if someone logs out and the other person doesn't have their work saved. So, again, if you've got multiple people connecting remotely, they probably all need to have their own system or their own time frame to log in. Lots of things to think of.
And it's always that trade-off between how many computers do we install it on, how much coordination do these people have to have between them, how much texting are they doing, saying, I'm logging on, I'm logging off, that sort of thing. But obviously, the less computers you have it installed on, the better, because mistakes will happen. We've made them already,
I think now would be a good time to have a look at some of the questions people would have already asked. Let's start with Rod Pettit. AnyDesk, we run playout automation on one PC. Needs to remain open, not locked off. Presenters in front of that PC a high percentage of the time. Any thoughts about the security in that case?
Do they normally have access to that computer? They can normally change settings on that computer or move the mouse?
Rod, if you want to put your hand up, I can give you access to speak if you have a microphone. Awesome. Hang on a second. I've just lost you. Oh my gosh.
In there somewhere.
Where'd you go? Rod, can you put your hand up again? There we go. Okay. Rod.
Hi, Rod.
Go for it. Hey, Rod.
Hi. Hello.
Go for it.
So, Rod, in your station, what kind of playout computer do you use? Is it one that's just a dedicated playout machine that is kind of left logged in all the time and anyone can jump onto it if they're in the station?
It's a Windows 10 machine. It sits in our primary broadcast studio. It runs automation in some hours, and other hours presenters might actually not even switch the automation off and play CDs, vinyls or whatever. But the majority of the time when there's a presenter there, they're actually switching the automation on and off, having a 5-minute discussion about something and switching the automation back on again.
Okay, so in that case, they do have access to the machine, but if you did want to log in for some reason or remotely access it and not have them look at it, there's usually a curtain, an electronic curtain you can pull across the screen so that they can't see what you're doing.
Fair enough.
And that's usually a setting that you set up when you're setting that machine up.
I understand. And actually, that's not my concern. My concern was regarding your point about strong passwords. It's less about a concern of a presenter being in front of a machine while it's remotely accessed, and more about protecting the machine itself from remote access by hackers. Yeah,
look, there's lots of really good different stuff out there that can do this. So again, like with AnyDesk or TeamViewer, to name some of the bigger players here, you can have really strong authentication on the to get into it. All right, but if they get past that, there's some other stations that I've seen use software similar to ClearLock or Screen Blur, where you can actually set a separate password on the screen. The computer might be logged in, but all the local controls and remote controls are locked until somebody enters the password. Now, you know, like everything technology, there are ways to get around things, but it's a pretty good deterrent if you log onto a computer and then there's a second password you have to crack through.
Okay, I hadn't heard about those.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ones, you know, and all you basically do is have a shortcut on the desktop that when the presenters go home or they're finished, they can just lock the screen, you know, and it has a password on it that says you need to enter the local password to unlock this screen. So you don't necessarily have to give somebody the admin password for the computer. You can just lock the screen with a custom message that comes up and says, this is locked until you enter the password. You know, have a great day.
Okay, I guess just the other step that we've taken is we've got administrator users on all of our PCs. No software can be installed without the administrator. The general users, including in the studios that I was referring to, they don't have admin rights.
Yeah, and that's a really good thing as well too. So locking down, you know, who has admin access to a computer. Automation software doesn't necessarily require somebody to have full admin rights to the computer to run, as long as it's, you know, been installed and set up. A lot of stations I've helped set up, you know, there's a generic user that's just called, you know, studio logon with a password, and that's what runs the automation. But then there's administrations, you know, administrative users in the background that, you know, you basically need to require your password to do anything.
And I think, as Brianna mentioned there too, that yeah, if people turn off the computer, well then that's difficult, and so that's important to control that. And having lots of little dymo notes. I know that Nikki's been running around Radio Adelaide with the dymo machine, making up little labels to make sure that we don't turn computers off. It's difficult.
Does that answer your question, Rod?
Yes, thank you for the discussion.
Thank you very much for your question. I think John wanted to say something very quickly, but we'll ask
I actually
another question
had a
shortly.
very interesting experience last week where I was working in a television station. This was live, you know, on-air television. And I was working at a workstation that actually filled completely by virtue of me logging on. So when I came to use some functions, there was like a couple of bytes left. And it, you know, as you might expect, admin access barred, everything locked down. In fact, I was unable to delete stuff that I could see should be deleted in order to be able to get access and keep the station running, which was a bizarre situation to be in, and no engineers and nobody with admin access on site. So locking everything down, but not having an escape clause is not necessarily the right thing to do. Always have a plan B.
And something that occurred to me, and if you cast your mind back to a few Technoramas ago, the chap from the sports network, and we were talking about protecting your play-up machine from viruses and things. And someone said, well, you know, well, it's connected to the internet so that we can, you know, download the weather. And he said, well, why connect it to the internet? And he's quite right in that, you know, if you were relying on this machine to basically play all your music and play all your sponsorship announcements, why connect it to the internet? And up until now, we would have said, it's fine, use it, just don't put it anywhere near the internet and don't allow anyone to put anything into it. This is an example when that becomes somewhat problematic. So yeah, interesting time.
So, you know, if you wanted to get a bit advanced in things, you can set up these computers. You know, a lot of people are really scared to put things like this on the internet. You can set them up so only certain applications can actually access the internet.
And Josh's point is actually quite right. So what I wanted to say is there's really 4 considerations you've got. Tim quite rightly said, use AnyDesk because it bypasses all the problems that you would have of complex network setup, of punching holes through firewalls, of managing VPNs and so on. But really there's 4 considerations. There is risk, complexity, function, and cost. So if you look at what Tim said was, here is a way of having really a high function without having complexity, because it can be done fairly easily without setting up VPNs and without worrying about routers and without worrying about the internet. And so now what you've got is a very easy system to implement. But the risk is that it's very easy to break, and if you let the wrong token out, your system actually has no security at all. If you go for the high complexity environment where you have somebody who's good with networking, and that doesn't actually require very much expertise these days, you can take a fairly inexpensive router that has a VPN sync built in, put VPN clients in, and be able to get through your firewall very securely with VPN access. And like I do that into my house, so I can get into the house from outside, and I'm really very comfortable. I don't mean through the door, I mean VPNing into the network. And I'm very comfortable that that allows me to get to all the machines, but I don't necessarily go then and access every machine directly. And in order to simplify some of the access, I use VNC a lot. So you put a VNC server on each machine. It's very, very light. And VNC client allows you to go and connect to each machine that you want to, or all of them at once if you want. It handles multiple screens. It handles everything you need. Bizarrely, one of the most popular, Tight VNC, which is a no-charge download, is written by some cats in Russia. And yet I've never heard of it being hacked, and I know a very large number of corporate users of Tight VNC, and it works extremely well, very light, very easy to use, hardly any drag on the machine. It still has password protection, and there's other things you can do like change port numbers and stuff just to make things harder for some hoon to find through your network. Then there's the question of cost. If you're not worried about cost, then you can go for very, very effective, expensive systems that will provide lots of function. VNC doesn't handle audio, whereas many of the other systems allow you to use the machine almost transparently, as AnyDesk does. So the question is risk, complexity, function, and cost. And this is one of these ones where you want to stand back, take a deep breath, and go, how do we want to run the station? How do we want our station to be accessed? And is spending a bit of money to get some function a good idea in the broader scheme of things?
Yeah, and look, it's one of the things I've jumped before, and I think as Carl said in the chat, when you said you remote into a computer and then remote to other computers. So we call that a jump box in the world of tech. And it's a really good way of triple protecting your network. You have one computer in your system that you access. It's locked down to only do what it needs to do. It doesn't have access to files. It doesn't have access to anything other than other computers. And to get on the other computers, you need a password. So again, that's putting another layer in between what people can do. And I don't want to, overcomplicate things and say by installing this, you're going to get hacked. It's, we're in a need to work from home at the moment. And as I can see from lots of people around, everybody's in their home office. Nobody's actually sitting in the studio anymore. Just don't compromise your security by jumping onto a solution straight away, because it looks easy and cheap. People scam the internet all the time to look for these kind of open links and loopholes. I think Tim wants to say something. I
was just going to go through some of those questions.
I want to jump back.
Janita was saying about TeamViewer, and remember, it's not just accessing the desktop remotely, it's being able to upload files, and various programs, whether they be TeamViewer or AnyDesk, give you that ability to upload a file, because that is important. Because the reality is we should have actually been thinking about this years ago, because there are people who can't make it into your radio station for whatever reason, and a great way to give community access is to allow them to do a show remotely, so that everyone's doing an OB almost. And if you think about the long-term future, you could see how the radio station might just be the transmitter site, and everyone's doing their program from home and just aggregating content up onto the transmitter site. Michael's comment about AnyDesk having access control list is a very valid point, so that you allow on the computer, on the target computer you want to access, you can set up a list of computers that it will let in, and it will reject all others. And that's a really good idea. It does get complicated to set up, but it's worth doing. And I suppose I'm focusing tonight on what do we do right now. If you haven't done anything, what do you do right now? John did jump in. And the not-for-profit, the connecting up prices for TeamViewer and those sort of thing are worth investigating, because that's certainly worthwhile.
Great. We have a question from Harry Miller saying, is it wise to have access with AnyDesk on studio computers in case of a transmission failure? I've assumed that studio machines should be isolated from the net. We have failovers at the tower, no net access. Would it be best not to access studio units without VPN tunneling or very strict access?
I think you can do it with very strong passwords if you just use one of those proprietary things. If you set up your own stuff using VPNs and BNC or whatever, well then you've got to take your own risks. But I think more importantly, getting back to Harry's comment about we don't have net access to the transmitter, you should get it. Set up a little Ubiquity link, set up a good data link between your studio and the transmitter, and have a play-out system there, whether it's a silence detector with an SD card. But you know, nearly all the play-out systems you buy now, the little Diva IP to audio decoders, they have a little SD card slot in them that you can FTP, you can update remotely, and you can upload a file list. So you can actually, you know, once every week or two or every month, you can actually upload a playlist plus all the sponsorship announcements and the community service announcements you would normally be playing, so that when you do go off the air, because it happens, that your transmitter plays out stuff. So even if your studio burns down, you should be able to FTP in from the other Ubiquity box at your house to your transmitter and keep the station running. So I'd sort of bypass some of this question and say, get good internet access at your transmitter, or good network access at your transmitter site.
Or even bad network access at the transmitter site.
Any access is good access. Look, there are lots of cheap, you know, look, I've seen some people put in SIM card, you know, little boxes at their transmitter for $100, and a year it costs them on 10 gig data. And if they're just using it for remote access to monitor and switch things, it makes life a lot easier. I might throw to Hannah now just to get some more of these questions answered before we run out of time.
Thank you. We've got a few questions from Brenton Chappell. If you have a spare computer, it would be best to set that one up for AnyDesk. Would it be best? I assume that meant that. And also, is it an also idea to set up a VPN as well?
So yes to a VPN. If you can set up a VPN and use it, and John explained before, he can magically teleport into his house from anywhere in the world. You know, VPNs are a fantastic tool and can be very secure. There are really good ways to secure VPNs. I'll refer to a comment that I think Johan made in the chat earlier, was that security is only as strong as your weakest link. You can invest in paid versions of TeamViewer or VPNs, but if you use a weak password, it'll be easier to crack. You know, if your station's called 2ABC and your password is ABC2 or 2ABC, people will guess that instantly. You know, make sure that you've got a strong password. You know, swap out the letters, swap out different things. Use a random password generator. You know, everyone's got an iPhone, save it in your, or an Android phone, save it in your notes. Have it somewhere that you know where it is, but you know, have a strong password. Anything, you know, anything helps. And as for setting up a separate computer, if you're talking about something similar to having a dedicated, like we were talking before, a dedicated computer, also known as a jump box at your station, that's a really good idea. Having a separate one for your computer at home, I don't know, probably a little bit tedious, but if you're worried about security and home access to your computer, then it's probably not a bad idea. Did I answer that?
Great.
Anyone else?
Does anyone have something to say to add to that, or is
Just welcome to Security Corner.
Great. We've got Greg Addison asking, how did blackouts at your radio station affect auto-starting all these layers of passwords, and the tech guy is not available?
And that's a really good point, is set all this stuff up and then go and abuse it. You know, pull the plug out on your station, make things fail, and how does it restart? Because the best remote access software in the world does nothing when you realize, gee, when our desk boots up, it boots up so that all the faders are off. So we've got a great remote access system that auto boots and plays out, but we can't actually get the audio to air. And I think, Josh, if you could share what you do, and for those stations that do have digital desks, the beauty of them, even though don't tell anyone I said this, the beauty of them is that they do allow you to remotely access your desk if you set it up. And Josh will show you what that looks like.
Yeah. So look, I love digital consoles. I think they are one of the best additions to radio.
Oh, come on now.
Until they're not. And it's 5 a.m. and someone rings you and says, we just lost power because somebody pulled something they shouldn't have. Someone brought their home percolator in, and now all the faders have moved to the bottom and we can't get them back up. That's where remote access comes in handy for techs. All right, we have a solution to fix the problems we create. You know, I'm going to try and share my screen now. Let's see if this works. So we have this wonderful thing, and I don't know any of your stations are familiar with, I'm just showing you a live system here. So if I break it and go off air, I'll probably get a phone call and have to fix something. But I'll try not to break it. So hopefully by now you can all see my screen. If Tim
We've got it.
becomes excellent, because it says sharing, but sometimes it doesn't. We're using TeamViewer, as you can probably see. You know, lots of different things I can control and do remotely. But one of the greatest things it does is it allows me into this system here. So this system here, for those you don't know, I work for CrocMedia, SEN Sport in Melbourne and SEN Track now around the place. We've got a great remote monitoring tool. This gives us full access to see everything that's going on in our network. So we've got 9 stations. There are actually 27 OB lines. The first 12 are our main ones. I can see straight away from here by clicking on things what everything is doing. You know, I can listen to it. I've actually got audio turned off on this computer at the moment, so I'll ignore that. I can listen to things. I can move things around. I can change routings of direct audio. The second really cool thing about this, you know, having remote access to the station is I can jump onto any of these here, click connect, and now I've got a digital console. It loads all the screens. It doesn't like being in here sometimes. But now straight away, I've got access to everything, and I can, you know, jump onto a fader and look at it and turn it on and off. I'm just literally picking on with no source just in case. You know, I did check before on the other screen. The studio is not routed to air, but I was just making sure. You know, from here, I can then change sources on faders, turn them all on, tell the presenter, hey, have a great day, leave me alone, I'm going back to bed. That saves me a 20-minute drive into the station. Now, not every station's lucky enough to have this, but there are ways that you can set things up using digital mixers and stuff in your on-air path or distribution amplifiers or different things that get you to air. So I might be able to remote into the station or remote into the transmitter site, jump onto a Diva off-air monitor and change where the stream's coming from, because we know that the station's lost power and I want to get it from a different source. You know, having that remote access and it being very quick and easy to use makes life a lot easier.
Josh, what is the speed of your connection at home?
At home, I'm on a 1 gigabit connection.
Seriously?
And at the office, I don't know, I can't remember what it is. There we go.
Okay, Josh is on an unusually high bitrate system at home. I'm on a 50/20 plan. If you were connected to another location that was on a 50/20 plan, which is a very typical NBN plan these days, not terribly expensive, that effectively gives you 20 megabits in each direction. Yep, Josh, you win. But
look, we you know, because of what we do and the amount of connections we have, but
yeah.
It does look really good and it works really well on this. One of the things though, like, you know, I was on a cruise ship 6 months ago. Feels like forever. And using their satellite uplink, you know, which was less than a meg, I was able to get on, go into here, change some routing,
do something useful,
and do some things. You know,
yeah.
You can even do this from your phone.
So I raise that because somebody's going to ask the question, or if they didn't, they should have asked the question: how much bandwidth do you need? What sort of plan can you do this with? And with most of the tools, they'll support compression. They might blur the screen down a little bit while still giving you reasonable function. Something will vanish to keep the connection up. But you would have noticed before, while Josh was looking at the panel, there was really no delay on the clock. And that wasn't just Josh's connection. That was his connection into work, back to him, then via Zoom and out to me. And your mileage is probably very similar. So the tools can certainly work. They just need to be fast enough. And in my experience, 10 megabits in each direction gives you a really pretty seamless experience. You wouldn't even worry about it.
No, and look, in times like this, I guess where we're going as well too is making sure you've got those things to back up and stuff. You know, if your home internet's bad, 4G might be good, and 4G might be, you know, connecting via your phone or something temporarily to get onto the system, or lots of other ways. But having stuff in place so you don't have to react to outages is one of my biggest things that I try and implement is when someone says, the building's on fire, I go, that's great, we've got a plan for this, let me just find that. You know, not having all your eggs in one basket, I guess, you know. I think people in the comments before have been saying things like UPSs and all that kind of stuff. You know, they're all really good tools to make life easier along the way for these kind of things.
We have a comment from Hugh Patton. It says, what are we going to do when the Aussie internet fails? It is already going soft hereabouts.
The NBN is fine. It's perfect. It's the most amazing thing we've ever had.
Well, yeah, you can cast your mind back, 10 years in the Gillard government when we were going to have fibre to the home. And look, you know, let's not get too political, but you can blame Foxtel and, you know, those mobs for that. But, and Telstra for that. But it is what it is. At the end of the day, even if the internet fails, you can still buy some of those little ubiquity dishes and set them up between your house and the station. So you can still have some sort of connection if you need to, because ubiquity dishes, and that's, you know, they're pretty cheap. But also, with a digital desk, you don't need to actually have remote access. You can just set the default so that when it reboots, it boots up in a certain manner and puts certain channels on here. You can have watchdog timers on your computers so that it forces them to reboot if they hang. Even with analog desks, most analog desks will have some way of putting a channel to air after a power failure. There'll be some way to set it, or if you ask someone a bit technical, they can design you a little bistable flip-flop or something that can just turn that channel on.
555 timer.
Yeah, you know, a few seconds after the panel boots up, the timer goes bing and just puts that channel to air. You know.
Can we take the question that Peter Jarrett asked, which is, you know, so lots of stations don't have digital desks, and he's asked a really good question. Now, you know, bearing in mind that right now, if you haven't got this implemented, you're probably too late. But the question is essentially, he's got an automation playout system, SAM in his case. They got an analog mixer, and it's got a mic and a computer and a CD and everything else. What might you use, or what might you have available as an alternative to that, that you could remote control without having to go and retrofit the whole place with digital desks right now? You know, what systems might work that give you a modicum of remote control, but aren't the digital desk?
I think a lot of playout systems, and I can only think of a Mac one off the top of my head, but you know, they will have some sort of control within them that you can have various sound cards feeding audio into them, and you can click on the screen to select, you know, various you know, mic inputs or audio inputs. I know Radiologic does it. I know Station Playlist does it. Most of them do.
Maybe you know, we could get a comment on that and whether we've actually answered that question adequately. I think the idea of having a software device that is just sitting there like a machine waiting in master control, that is just one input to your station switcher. So you have physical studios, Studio 1, Studio 2, Studio 3, and an extra input that is the emergency PC that you can control. And it's actually relatively easy to have a device which will remotely control your station's on-air switcher rather than replacing all of the infrastructure. And that would then allow you to connect in by remote control, take over the station switcher, set it to the PC, then control the PC, and you've got software control then.
Yeah, and I think as Ren put in the comments there as well, you know, having a backup is probably a good thing as well. They've got I was saying, reading Ren here, they've got a small playlist that they play while they muck around with the playout software or while it's offline. You know, all via one channel on TeamViewer, and that could, you know, having a direct playout computer tapped into your broadcast path. You know, it might be there all the time. It might be a you know, something through your on-air path in the middle that can just go to air if you need to go to air, and that can either be at the transmitter, it can be wherever your streaming is, it can be whatever. You know, there's lots of different ways to do it, and to comment on individual cases, I probably need a bit more information.
And I think Peter Gill's comment about, you know, how they set their switching up so that it defaults to the playout is a good idea. But the only way you test this is, the only way you prove it is by trying to break it. And so you should try and break it. And maybe you set the transmitter, you disconnect your STL from your main feed and you just feed your STL with an iPod or whatever. And then you do your best to try and break the station, because it'll happen. It's going to happen over the next few weeks. And it'll happen when no one is allowed out of their house.
We'll try and get through some more of these questions.
That'd be great. We've got a comment from Greg Addison again. Thank you for the response to my question thus far, but I'm still unclear of how to restart the station when there are 3 layers of passwords and the tech guy is unavailable. Is the answer to give all presenters the passwords, which is against your advice?
Yeah.
Greg, probably look easy is, I'm not exactly sure about how the situation's set up and stuff where you are, but I guess I would probably ask why some of those passwords are there in the first place, and things probably aren't set to start automatically. Again, Tim touched on before, and I think John did as well, that it might be better off to set up local user accounts that don't have administrator access that can run the software they need. So that way he doesn't have to give out the administrator password. He can just give you a local login password that runs your playout software, runs your editing software, but doesn't necessarily have admin access to everything.
Look, you're never going to be protected if you've got a security situation. You have a security situation, and the only way you can guarantee 100% of the time, if nobody is available, that you can get access to everything is by having access to everything. Your real security is going to be somewhere in the middle of total lockdown, you can't do anything, and complete anarchy, anybody can do anything. One approach that I've taken is to have secure passwords, but have and in an extreme case, envelopes inside envelopes. And it's the equivalent of the break glass in case of emergency. So you give these to people and you say, I'm going to check this every so often. You look to see if they've steamed the envelopes open, but all of the critical passwords that you need are with somebody that you can trust, so that if it hits the fan, the station president, who doesn't know anything about passwords and blah blah blah, pick anybody you like, can go and tear this envelope open, and there are the instructions and the passwords in clear text that they can then read to somebody in an emergency.
It's a bit like on a British nuclear submarine. They have the letters of last resort that are sealed inside an envelope, inside a safe, and so you have this so that that people can get into this. But it's obvious when they do, because they've opened the safe and they've torn the envelope open. So I think you do need to make that information available, but in a manner that sort of says to someone, hey, if you've accessed this badly or maliciously, we will punish you harshly.
The difference with a radio station, of course, is that it's not like a bomb. I mean, the worst, really, what you're protecting against is not that somebody will get on air and do something stupid, but that somebody who isn't part of the station will get in and do something stupid, and then you have the situation that you can't control. So you sort of think about which direction you're trying to protect.
Good comment from Adam about the Behringer XR12 desks. There's a lot of good, cheap digital stuff that you can buy that are live audio desks that you wouldn't use in the studio, but you could plug them in between. You can plug them into the broadcast chain in this situation.
We'll try and get through some more of these questions on the side here. If you've got questions or comments you want us to go, guys, rather than throwing them in the chat, just try and throw them in the Q&A so we can
field them.
Just keep track of things as we go through.
Cool. I'm going to throw to Greg Whitworth. Hi, Greg. Does any desk carry audio so that we can use the playout computer as just an audio slave? Otherwise, everyone has access to their music on the remote computer.
Any desk will send through audio so you can hear what's playing on the remote computer. But does that answer the question?
Well, Josh's question was, can you send audio the other direction? I would say that it'd be incredibly risky, because then
Probably
you really are relying
live
on the vagaries of the internet.
Yeah, it wouldn't be frame accurate. It would sound awful, I'd suggest. So I wouldn't do it.
Using any desk to try and broadcast would not work. Like we've tried it. Even with TeamViewer, you need to actually probably voice track and record and use the drag and drop file features and stuff to throw your audio back in and then load it into your playout queue.
And voice tracking, for those that don't know, is where you have a playlist of songs and you drop your voice in the middle of it, so that you back announce and forward announce without actually having to wait for the music to play.
So Peter Gill sort of covered that by saying, you know, hello, we use a mechanism to move files around. He uses Dropbox, and then he uses VNC to do the dirty work of controlling where the files go and dropping them into playlists.
Actually, there was a question about the lockdown laws in New South Wales from Graham.
Yes.
Yeah, look, that's a good point, because people often say to me, I work at a community station, and it's like, well, it's probably not defined as work if you're not being paid. You know, if there's no consideration for your effort, in a legal parlance, then they may well say, no, that's volunteering, you can't go out.
The CBAA is currently looking into that and seeking further clarification from the government as to whether we as volunteers are actually determined as critical service. So I would recommend, if you haven't already, join the COVID-19 Facebook page for community radio, and they will give you guidance on that.
And Rod says, will any desk support multiple clients? It will, but one at a time in the free version. And I recommend your station take out at least the low-level paid version just to support any desk, because we shouldn't use any of these for free. Or however you do it, we should pay them some money, because if everyone starts using them for free, they will say, sorry, no more free use. But if you want multiple clients, that becomes more complex and quite expensive. You're better off having a system where people SMS each other and say, I've finished, it's your turn now, and they take over, that sort of thing. I've lost one side of my lights.
What other questions have we got there, Hannah?
Jeffrey Munford has asked, we use TeamViewer, but it is not reliable as the password keeps changing. Is there a way around this?
The short answer is yes. You can set a permanent password. Just jump on the TeamViewer website and say, how do I change the remote access password for TeamViewer? They will give you some really quick instructions on how to do it.
And Adam says it's easy to fix. Yep.
And then we've got one from Brenton Chappell. Given the number of volunteers it takes to present at a station, is there value in moving this back up approach to keep on air in case the government restricts further who can stay open for business?
That's why we're saying it. And if you're in South Australia and you're from a SACBA station, you would have received quite a strong email suggesting you need to be doing this stuff now, because if you don't do it now, A, you may not be able to run your station remotely, and B, if you don't start following good hygiene things, you might start killing your announcers. So, well, there's a better way to say that, but you know, it's important that we do this stuff because people's lives will depend on what we do a week ago.
Look, yeah.
Let alone in the future,
yeah.
You know?
And there are a lot of stations that now are restricting who can come into the station, and they're not saying no to everyone. There's lots of stations that say don't, you know, everybody A, B, C can't come in, but if you're on this list, you can come in. And the lists that's going in are the ones that are, you know, helping load remote content, getting people connected, connecting up codecs, all that kind of stuff. So some really good ideas of minimising the amount of people that actually come into your station rather than, you know, restricting everybody straight up. You know, we should be really following the government's advice and only if you need to go in. And there are really good ways like this or anything getting, you know, people working from home and delivering content, creating content in their own home and sending it into the station to be played.
Rob Meaton's just made a comment that the New South Wales Public Health announcement last night says volunteer work is considered work. So there you go.
Whereas Victoria apparently is saying that it's not essential, so it's entertainment. Yeah.
One of the things that all of this shows up is a state of readiness to be able to handle an emergency. Now, you know, a lot of stations like 2 weeks ago were going, time for us to grab the OB kit and move that off site just in case we can't get on site, which is a good thing. But then do you have a way of connecting your OB kit that is now off site into the station? And these are plans that you should always have in place because there is always potential for a fire, there is potential for an emergency, there is potential for all kinds of things. And if you are going to approach this correctly, you would have some sort of flyaway emergency kit that could connect directly into the transmitter and eliminate your studio building completely, and that kit would not be stored on premises at the station, because it's pretty pointless if the station burns down and your OB kit has burnt down with it. You then have nothing. So now is actually not a bad time, because the example is right in front of you, and it's a little easier to see some of the realities of handling a situation like this, to run those planning sessions, which you can do via Zoom and other tools that mean you don't have to be in the same room, and think about, what is my backup and emergency plan? And use this, you use this to frame your thinking, because you're right in the middle of it, and that will lead to a good result. And then sometime down the track, that's when you will start thinking about the CBF grant that will allow you to implement what you've now thought about and documented.
Great. Benjamin Erin from 8CCC. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Are there some simple and affordable software solutions for going live, presuming a good internet connection? For example, a web stream but software codecs, etc.
It's probably a whole session on itself, because you can have dedicated boxes, like you could have a Diva box or a BarX box at each end, and you could set up a stream. There are things like, if I can just say, share this just as an example. And this actually costs money if you buy it. This is an Italian bit of software.
Never would have guessed.
Yeah, I know. MB Soft, and it's amazing. It allows you to sort of do all the play out stuff on the computer. It will send emails to your phone if stops working, but it also allows you to basically hook a microphone up to your phone or a mixer up to your phone, press a button, and you can do an OB straight into the station. Now, this isn't a Today solution, because the full version costs about $1,200, and you need a USB software key that has to come from Italy, and I'd suggest there isn't much coming out of Italy at the moment. But I just point that out because I was at a narrowcast station the other day, and they use it. Amazing. They do all their OBs. They just do them via anyone's phone, just by plugging a microphone or the desk into the phone, and it all works seamlessly. And Lucy is a bit like that as well for those stations. Anyone use Lucy at all?
I haven't.
Okay, some of the stations in Melbourne use Lucy, and that's very good at doing that sort of stuff.
Spell Lucy?
Lucy.
Oh,
yeah.
Benjamin, I hope that answered your question, by the way. We've got something from Trevor Franklin. We are not doing in-studio interviews, but scheduling lots of phoners. We are only allowing one person in at the station at any given time. There's a lot of people doing that. My own station is doing that at the moment, Eastside Radio.
One of the most...
LUCI. Thank you, Stephen. LUCI. Yeah.
One of the most fascinating things about this experience at the moment is people realizing that there can be trade-offs between quality and content. And, we've said for a long time, content is king. So the TV station that I was working at last week was running 3-hour programs live to air. It was basically 3 people sitting in a studio, riffing, wearing headsets and talking about their favorite topic, and throwing to live interviews using FaceTime. And we were connecting FaceTime connections. These were people's mobile phones. The pictures, and I'll be complimentary, the pictures looked like crap. But it was very exciting being able to cross to somebody who was doing a cannonball run to get from Melbourne to Brisbane before the border closed in Queensland. And you can see that the opportunity to think very laterally and do things that maybe nobody would ever have considered doing, but that represent good content on your station, will be driven by, there isn't anything else we could have done. Get it out now. And if you've got naysayers at your station, but you're delivering good content and it's engaging, you'll be holding on to your listeners.
And you can see, just using Zoom like we are now, that the quality is quite reasonable. You could have one person in the studio who's got Zoom running, feed the audio into the desk, and you could, and of course that person would have to have the microphone up to them to hit for their voice to get there. But you could have 4 or 5 people doing a show to air, and for 40 minutes, because you can use Zoom for 40 minutes for free.
For free.
So.
The other day, we did an on-air chat with all of the AFL coaches and had 17 people join via Zoom and drop in and drop out as they did it, and the audio didn't miss a beat.
An alternative to Zoom, and it's a no-charge alternative that you might want to investigate, is a thing called Jitsi, Jitsi. The experience is very similar to Zoom. It's an open source product. You'll find it if you go and have a look on the web. There is a Jitsi server at jit.si. Which enables you to set up a conference. I used that this morning. The audio was fine. And a lot of these tools have really, really good echo cancelers and really good audio. Really good.
And even on Microsoft Office, you know, if you get that free thing, if you're a not-for-profit, the Office suite, that has Teams or something. It's called Teams. Yeah, and that's similar to Zoom. And that's free if you're a not-for-profit and you've registered. So there are many options.
We've got a comment from Peter Gill saying, we can use voice tracking for both the existing live shifts and for pre-record. Volunteers are free to work in their spare hours and program managers can place the shows in suitable times. It is fast because we are not moving music from the remote computer and the player puts it together.
And that's one of the things, you know, is probably identifying, do you need to be live at this stage? You know, and this is something that even in, like, you know, I'm involved in community radio, I'm also involved in commercial radio. And some of the questions we're asking across both sides is, does this show have to be live?
Or could it be sounding as live?
Or yeah, and that's it. You know, we thank the liveness and it goes to air and, you know, doesn't miss a beat.
Now, I am conscious that we've come to the end of our scheduled time for the webinar. But what I'd like to do now is, if people are comfortable to stay, open the floor to more questions. If you would prefer to put your hand up to ask a question in person on the microphone, please do so now. And we will field your questions if you have any more. But for your information, we will be sending out a document that notes the 10 most popular remote access softwares for your stations, and they're all free. So have a look at that. I'll send them to your emails in the next few hours, and there will be a recording of this webinar put up tomorrow. So please tell people that couldn't make it, share with other stations. It's really important. I'd also encourage you to please sign up to the Technorama Facebook page, check out our website.
The Technorama Facebook page or the Q&A page, or both?
Both.
Yes, exactly.
Technorama Community Radio Tech Q&A and the Technorama Facebook page.
Yeah.
And if you're watching this webinar after the fact, please feel free to email me at info@cmto and .org.au, and I will email you any paper trail stuff that comes from this webinar.
Hannah, could I make an offer? The Technorama website we mostly use for announcements, and it pushes out to Twitter and a whole lot of other stuff. We don't normally man that for conversation. If you want to ask a question of the Brains Trust, there's now well over 600 people involved in the Q&A site, and there are really good answers that come back really, really quickly. If you get to a situation where you'd like some advice or guidance for your board, your committee, you're getting into a planning exercise, and you'd like one of us to maybe, you know, jump in, ask the question on Q&A. There will be people who will be willing to do that, or drop us a line via info@technorama.org.au, or go to the Technorama site and use the contact page, and we will find somebody who can help you at an appropriate time. This is a really great time to put your hand up and ask for help, and that's one of the things that we hope we're good at doing.
Just something that Trevor mentioned there about two of our presenters were on the last flight into Fraser Island, and there was a passenger that tested positive. Yeah, so work out what you're doing there in terms of what your particular local state laws, because it'll be your state health commission that will define that, and be very careful. And we've issued an alert to all of our SACBA members stations that there are some people that do shows on multiple community radio stations, And it's really important they choose one station and stick with that and don't enter the other station. Or if you're a technical person that shares your technical skills between stations, you probably need to stick with one station or very carefully control your access, because you can see how in that situation, if that person who was on the flight also did shows at multiple stations, you could have multiple stations shutting down, and so you could lose several stations overnight.
I certainly don't think I'd want to be near some of our government leaders who have both tested positive and refused to be tested. Boris Johnson is now in lockdown, but Dr. Norman Swan from the ABC has tested negative, which is great.
Great news. Something else just before everyone heads out, if you could pretty please fill out the feedback survey after the webinar. It really helps us to tailor the content to make sure that you're getting exactly what you want from Technorama, from the CMTO, and from our sector bodies, because we all do talk to each other. So if there's something that you really, really want to know about, especially now, please, please, please fill out the feedback. And I will be reading it personally, so it would be great to hear what you have to say and notes for improvement, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, it means you can say what you like about the three men on this, but don't slag off at Hannah, because she gets to filter the feedback.
That's it.
Can I just say something that's probably important to everybody? You will know that the CBF has pressed the stop button on the grant evaluation process at the moment. They had an emergency board meeting last week. They have elected to take the money that they've got in the bucket at the moment and to go through a different process to see how that money can be best used to serve the stations under the circumstances right now. And I'm very glad, because I know at least one application that under the current circumstances, people have looked at it and gone, well, that's a stupid idea because it involves meetings. We're not going to fund that. But the CBF is now engaging in building up a sort of an emergency war council to see what they are going to do. Money will flow again, but at the moment, if you're in dire straits, like particularly dire straits because of COVID virus, be ready to respond to the CBF when they raise their hands. I don't know exactly what it is they're going to do, but be ready.
We have a question from Bad Deirdrick. I work with Jeff Munford at RBM 89.1 FM in the Blue Mountains, and our biggest problem is finding someone to set up port forwarding VPNs, etc. Suggestions to find a resource?
I suppose that's why you use things like AnyDesk, because you don't need to do that with them. But other comments?
Well, you've still got to set that up. The thing is, somebody has to go in the first time and set up the first bit that allows you to set everything else up. I'm guessing that the question is more about where do you find these people? Right now, that's a difficult one to answer, because not a lot of people are going to jump in a car or get on a train and go up to the Blue Mountains to sort out your networking. However, look, ask the question on Q&A and be ready to say what gear you've got. So if you know what router you've got, you know what your internet don't give sort of details of addresses or anything. But if you know what type of hardware you've got, that's not a bad question, because somebody could say, that router can be configured in this way. You'd use this software, and then you get your action plan together, and somebody goes in and does it once, gets you set up. Once you're connected in, then you can do a lot of the other things by remote control, do the software installation and sort of expand out your sphere of influence. It'd probably take you less than half a day for somebody to come and properly configure a router that's VPN capable and install VNC on every machine in the place, and then you can do the rest from your kitchen table.
That's it. Are there any more questions that people would like to ask over microphone or in the Q&A? I'll give you 10 seconds to do so.
Hey, Bill.
Q&A downstairs. That looks like everyone's had their questions answered. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. It's really great to be able to engage with you all, and we all hope that you're doing very well and keeping safe. And thank you so much to our excellent panel for tonight, This is Tim Borgas from SACBA. We have Josh Pearson from CrocMedia and also our VP of Technorama. And we have John Maisels, our President of Technorama. I'm Hannah Murray. I'm the Student Services and Compliance Officer at the Community Media Training Organisation and also a board member of Technorama. Join us on Technorama Facebook page, the Community Media I've forgotten what it's called now. The community tech Q&A, and of course give CMTO's Facebook page a like as well. Let us know what you think. Thank you so much for joining us. See you later.
How long can I do this for?